LCK Playoffs have started, so I'm here on the Monte and Wolf Show. It's me, Monte, and joining me is, of course, Wolf to talk about the first round of playoffs, previewing the next round of playoffs, answering your questions about, is Gen.G picking Dplus Kia a good idea? Should they have picked T1 instead? But we're not there yet. Let's start with Dplus versus BNK FearX. Quite an interesting and weird series, actually. Not very competitive overall. It was nearly a 3-0, but because Dplus Kia is becoming quite a team with their own style. This series was actually probably more interesting than we thought it would be right off the bat.
Yeah, I do think, the big elephant in the room was that ShowMaker locked the Nasus pick in game one into the Azir, which is buffed on this patch. And, apparently it had been going around like in solo queue and ShowMaker was streaming it a lot. I hadn't seen that. I was preparing for this playoffs based on the data we had and like some of the expectations I had for BNK, some of their draft reads. And then this Nasus pick just showed up, and I was thinking about it, like, what does it mean for the comp? They have this really oppressive Ivern comp. They have Rumble, right? And Rumble can be quite good with Nasus because you wither somebody, the equalizer goes down. You have a ton of scaling in this comp. And I thought it was a really cool like niche pick. But then after this pick happened, after he kind of destroyed Closer with it, and then he wasn't even the main character in this game, frankly, but it was very unstoppable, very difficult for Henna to deal with. It was banned in every single playoffs game for the rest of the first round. Like, it was never allowed to be played again. It
I
was
love
banned
that.
in every game.
I love that. And, we really, the LPL has been the league that has been doing most of the Nasus play. And it is a lot of Nasus top over there. Now it's like infested the mid lane. Reason is, guys, Nasus's E has been going down in terms of mana cost, so it's more spammable. And we get a lot of scaling. Like, I think what's true is that we've seen a lot of handshaking into scaling or matchups that are not very punishable, which is another reason why we get to see Smolder in a lot of these compositions as well. But Nasus just ends up being really quite safe in lane a lot of the time, able to push very effectively because he puts 3 points into his E before maxing W, good into double or, if you're T1, triple AD compositions that we're seeing because Wither, his W just kind of shuts everything down, infinitely scales like a Smolder, and actually is capable of like front lining and then like closing the gap sometimes on the enemy team. So I think Nasus is going to stick around for a bit.
Honestly kind of happy with it because it's a pick that's been so fringe for so long, and even like to call him fringe at times it feels like disingenuous. He was basically completely irrelevant for so long. And then he was teched into top lane in a few matchups, like you mentioned. It was played in the LCK once by Morgan, but it's been hovered a lot. It's been played in challengers, so it's definitely a pick that was on the edge of becoming meta because of that wave clear on the E that you put your first few points into, getting better and better. And he's tanky, he slows, he kills 80 carries. It's pretty sick. But now I feel like he's got the versatility of being played in mid lane and can make a big impact in some of the early jungle fights and stuff like that. It ends up being really fun to see him. So I'm here for it. I don't know if it's 100% ban worthy at the moment. I'm not sold on that because I just don't have the data because it's banned every game, and I'm not sure like how our mid laners are really playing this pick, or maybe really only ShowMaker was spamming this and then everyone else was like, I don't know, somebody else could be spamming this, we can't know. So, and we're not prepared for this, so we better just ban it because there's just not a lot of information. It did feel very weird. Felt to me like it was an insanely strong pick into Azir specifically though. And they absolutely crushed Closer's Azir. And Closer's been looking better on Azir. By the way, he had the best performance out of anyone on BNK in that game, despite losing lane really hard to the Nasus. Everyone else was having a really rough time. This series in general, for me, came down to two major picks, though, besides the Nasus. Obviously, it came out in game one, was banned every game. The other two picks were the Rel for Moham, which they refused to ban, and just allowed him to play every game, even though it's been his best pick statistically. He picked up his first loss on it. Yeah, in this series, and then he just continued to win with it and was able to play it every game. And then also the Ziggs pick, which was the only trump card that BNK had, which I thought was a fantastic choice into the composition they were playing up against. They had the ability to prevent lane swaps with that pick, which was, pretty prevalent in that series, prevalent in the second series, prevalent leading up into the playoffs. And Ziggs just kind of says no lane swaps, no shenanigans, or I get all your plates and I become extremely fed early. So I like that pick, but then that was banned away and they couldn't do that again. What I was disappointed by was BNK not playing their pick-based style at all. Maybe that's because they thought some of the picks have become irrelevant in this meta. Like, Closer never tried to play Ahri. Silas was buffed on this patch. I felt like they could have definitely tried to index into that a little bit more, especially with the Maokai being picked up from Lucid. They didn't try that. They didn't go for any
Yone.
sort of Yone. It's Closer. Like, they didn't play any sort of like Ari Viego. Yeah, the Vi is banned every game because Lucid's also on their team. Like, you're probably not going to get to pick up the Vi, but they just didn't play what they were best at, and instead just played some weird new version of BNK that was never going to beat a Dplus that was way better prepared for this patch and this meta. Like, Closer playing Zeri just is like the opposite of what I expected to see. Is like, oh yeah, I'm gonna play Zeri now. That's the thing I can do. I don't think it is, and it wasn't, sadly.
I mean, if you look at the game that BNK FearX won, I mean, they nearly lost it in the end. There was a pretty major comeback attempt by Dplus that was almost successful. And, I think they did a good job with the draft, and playing like Maokai, Corki, Ziggs is definitely feels very LPL. But also you get to see just how oppressive these compositions can be in terms of siege, in terms of poke, in terms of like long range engage. And, I don't really fault Fox for playing that way, because that was their main win here, and I think that they really nailed it, and we should actually probably be seeing more Ziggs, if anything, in the LCK. Gen.G starting to bust it out on pays a little bit, but if I'm Gen.G and I'm looking at this, like, I'm probably prioritizing Ziggs for the series that's coming up, because it did prove so effective. And honestly, like, if aiming is going to play Smolder in the bot lane, because remember that this is the Dplus special. When we talk about them being a little bit weird, it's ShowMaker weird picks, or ShowMaker, playing champions like AP Twisted Fate that no one else in the world is playing, right? And they like to play around these styles and around ShowMaker being a little bit offbeat and surprising. And then aiming's all in on the hyper carry. It's why aiming was so great for a lot of this split. And he gets 3 games of Smolder here, whereas most of the time we see Smolder mid and top and not played at the AD carry position. But if you're going to opt into some of these, scaling matchups, are going to do the lane swaps, he's perfectly capable of playing it. It is very much a champion that aiming can carry on.
Yeah. The one weird kind of standout thing for aiming in this one, though, was his extremely slow stacking compared to other players who played the pick incredibly well. Like Viper, for example, who's arguably our fastest stacking. BDD was playing it in the mid lane, so it's a little bit unfair, but also has been able to stack it pretty consistently, pretty fast. Aiming stack timings were at like 27, 28 minutes, which is about 5 minutes or so, maybe a little bit more than 5 minutes behind like the curve that you want to be on. But it doesn't ultimately matter that much if you can't punish the team during that window. And Dplus were getting just enough dragons to be able to say, we don't want to fight this fight. We don't need to fight this. We can step away, give this objective up because we're fully scaling. We're going to be online later. So it does feel very aiming-esque in that, yeah, it's not the champion that's going to get the most value out of itemization, but does hit his breakpoints very quickly when you give him all the gold. When you get the Leandries, for example, that's a huge spike for him when we get to the late game when he's already scaled up and stacked up, and then he has that Leandries burn on top of his Q burn. Then he's really, really strong in the late game. So while it doesn't feel quintessentially aiming, it's still aiming's playstyle to sit back, farm it up, and then be the carry in the late game. And he was able to do that. I think we'll probably see some big adjustments made in how Gen.G draft around these Smolder picks. They may even draft Ziggs early to basically just deny the pick entirely. I don't know how vulnerable Pays on the Hens will be if they went for Ziggs in like first rotation on red side, for example. If there's really going to be a lot of punish play coming.
I think it's fine, because we should assume that it's Chovy can play it as well, even though it's not really a mid lane pick at the present point in time. It's more played bot lane, but it still is going to be a flex on red side, so I think it's probably okay.
Yeah, that would be my expectation, because obviously every team is going to ban it in the second banning phase if they have this Smolder picked up, or any sort of other scaling bottom laner that they want to lane swap with and avoid some unfortunate annoying matchups early. Gives you the opportunity to avoid a top matchup you don't necessarily like as well. Ziggs just says no to all that, so I really do think this pick absolutely should be prioritized a little bit higher. Is starting to be prioritized finally here in the LCK a little bit higher. So that was a good draft from BNK. I really liked how they played that one out. Sure, like you mentioned, there were some mistakes made and it was a near loss ultimately, but they did get it done in the end. I was just, Ryu is the coach, right? And he's in control of the drafting. And this is something that I was trying to get into a little bit narratively on the cast, but there was a lot of wonky stuff happening, so I never really got to really dig into it. But he's obviously a person and a coach and an ex-player whose entire legacy is based around the Faker moment, and it's him getting owned by Faker, right? And as a coach, I feel like he's had some really rough lows. Like he's had some really bad drafts this season in particular. And then towards the end of the season, we were like, oh, he's kind of figured it out. He knows how to draft for these players. And I was hoping that we were going to see some cool variations on pick-based comps from BNK and dive-based comps from them. Maybe even some like Kaisa coming through. I was ready for that. I was like, oh, this is Ryu's moment. And I feel like he really let me down and gave Moham Rel every game and just completely bombed. Because I thought, yeah, I mean, Zepha's obviously had fantastic reads. Dplus Kia, not DPS, but the DPS players and Dplus Kia as well have so much flexibility, right, in draft. We know that about this team. We mentioned this when we talked about them going to playoffs last week and previous seasons and even previous rosters. They're just so well known for having good draft reads. And Ryu really needed to step up and be ready to match that. And instead, it felt like he just drafted his players' comfort. Like, closer playing Akali into Yasuo just felt like it was just throwing the game away, like being like, well, I guess we'll see you next year. Like I couldn't accept it. I really was disappointed. I think everybody walked out of that series feeling like they did not hit the mark with their drafts at all. And it wasn't just Dplus had a good read. It was just felt like BNK minus that Ziggs draft. They didn't have any plan.
I mean, Closer is the guy though that wants to punish like the blind Yasuo pick. You know what I mean? And like almost certainly in terms of draft, like that was a Closer call probably to pick the Akali, and he didn't have a good game despite the fact that he is known for these melee champions. But I mean, and I understand the theory behind what he's doing, which is that I don't think he's technically incorrect to say, okay, you can have Rel, we're just going to take Alistar, right? And this should be able to counter Rel. This should be able to get her out of these engages. But the fact is that Moham was just absolutely popping off on this champion. Also, this champion might be a little bit busted. One has to start thinking. I mean, Beryl also did very well with it in the game that they won in the T1 series, and we've seen it particularly be popular over in LEC. So this is a champion that looks like it's just, players are getting better at using it, and the flash engages are becoming increasingly devastating. And it's like, if you already, you're BNK, the thing is, though, that they won the last game with Alistar. So if you're confident that Duro can do that again, then fine. But I think the side of that I come down on, Wolf, is like Dplus almost came back in that game because of an engage by Rel, right?
Yeah.
And you didn't deny it, and that's why we had a 50-minute long game that BNK FearX should have won faster. And so,
I mean, it's just very clear. Sorry to cut across you, but it's just very clear that Duro's Alistar is not the counter, right? Like, it's just very clear he is not able to do it. It is considered by basically everyone universally the answer to Rel is Alistar, and they had the Alistar to counter it every time, but it just wasn't. He was getting outplayed, and
it feels like Ryu was not accounting for the players in the game, just for the theory of the game itself. And I think if Moham is, Moham was arguably like the MVP of this entire series, and if that's the case, if you're playing against a player who's doing so well, and maybe your support isn't capable of countering, maybe it's time just to take that off the table and see what else Moham has to offer.
There is just so much AoE in ultimates in general, but just in damage in the game right now, that if you set up a Magnet Storm, even if it only hits 2 people, that can be fight winning. If it hits 3 or more, that's the team fight is not even a team fight. When you have Equalizer, you have Lilia ult. In this draft, they also had
bullet time.
They have bullet time. It's just, you just can't let Rel through with this. It's just not allowed. It doesn't matter if it's Moham or not. It might if Duro's on the other side and they have that draft, you don't let Duro have Rel. You just don't let people have Rel when they could just drop long range AoE ultimates. The Smolder ultimate as well, and some of their other drafts was also very strong when you drop a Rel ultimate down into a team fight. So I just felt like it was very disrespectful, and it just seemed so obvious to me, and I think most people watch. I mean, Valdez and I got a little bit snarky almost on the cast because it was just like so obvious that given the performance of Moham, you can't let him have this pick, and they did, and he got MVP again, and they won the game, and it was like, I mean, the Akali pick didn't hit. It was obviously a bit of an issue in picking Ornn when the Yasuo is there and has the wind wall, also feels a little bit rough, right? Like there's a lot of things compounding in this draft that were issues, but go next. I guess they still have their opportunity in the regional qualifier, so maybe
I mean,
they
they're
can
at the very bottom of the gauntlet now with facing off against KT, so might be a little rough there.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to go well for them, but you know, maybe they'll make some improvements because KT can lose to anyone. Monty, you know, on any given day. Will they make it through the rest of the gauntlet? Probably not. But KT can lose to anyone.
Well, before we talk about that T1 KT playoff telecom war, let's talk about our sponsor for this show, which is MeUndies. And MeUndies offers wonderful men's undergarments for you, also women, but let's be real. This show is watched by guys. MeUndies, though, has over 10 different styles for men, from boxer briefs to jock straps to their special pouch underwear called Ball Caddy. And they come in over 100 different colors and prints. And what's great about this is that it's made out of natural fabric. So it's made out of micromodal, which is incredibly soft, incredibly breathable, quick dry, moisture wicking, and anti-odor, which is great for wearing to the gym, by the way. Cotton underwear at the gym, not so awesome. Not so awesome. Especially in the summer, too. And it's been so damn hot and humid here in Korea, Wolf. So it's perfect for that kind of weather. Also, you're from Georgia, so you know.
Yeah. The climate is the same in terms of the humidity and the heat, and it's nasty. But with
and you get swamp ass.
Yeah, it no matter what, it is going to happen to you. It will strike, and it won't even be unexpected. You'll be like, well, it is what it is.
I played myself.
It's you know, you're going outside, you're working out. I went for a run today. You know, it's just hot out there. You're going to get sweaty. You're going to get nasty. So you got to have the right tools. You got to have the right equipment, Monty.
That's right.
And if there are any women watching our show, you should check out those as well.
That's right.
I don't know if there are, but if you're out there, like, thanks for watching. We love you. And check out MeUndies.
That's right. So you guys can be prepared with MeUndies. Get 20% off your first order plus free shipping at MeUndies.com/MonteWolf. That's MeUndies.com/MonteWolf for 20% off plus free shipping. MeUndies. Comfort from the outside in. Great product, guys. You will enjoy that. And as usual, supporting our sponsors is the best way to support the shows you love here on Last Free Nation. All right. So KT versus T1, Wolf. Some people were hyped about this because we had seen some close telecom wars. KT upsetting T1 at the home ground. The fact that this series had always been kind of weird because Faker had BDD even when it was, I mean, it still is, but even more so the like Tristana quirky AD carry off in the mid lane. Neither of these guys like those picks. They're always the Azir enjoyers, the preferers, the control mage players. So they do tend to kind of play more towards that style, and BDD has been busting out the Smolder quite a bit recently. He's been by far the best player, most consistent player on this KT roster. And so we come into this series, and T1 actually has some fabulous drafts and a really good game plan for dismantling KT.
Yeah, so in the first game they gave Faker Azir, and I was yelling at the TV being like, I can't believe it's literally KT, we've been here before. Faker's underperforming, Azir's really strong. He's going to play it every game. If you don't let him play it. They'll let him play it. He did not have a good performance. But despite that, T1 were able to take the win. So, you know, at that point I was like, well, maybe
it's not only not a good performance, Wolf. I would say that T1 was very far ahead in this game, and then Faker almost threw it by trying to overextend to get a pick when they could have just controlled vision, controlled every objective from that point forward. But in spite of that, you know, beyond the Azir pick, I do want to really credit T1 for leaning into the Olaf. Like you start to see, you start to see like Smolder, Seraphine, and the Olaf just becomes extremely high priority. And this is something that a lot of European teams have known for a long time. And we've seen some of it from time to time in the LCK, but not really recently. And so they had this prepared, they busted out, especially because of course Deft likes to play the Ashe at times. And you also get to see the Neela make a return for Gumayusi, which is always one of his pocket picks. And as we theorized, the Senna priority, now that she's been changed over to more kind of enchanter-focused items on 14-16. So it's Keria playing it this time around. It's no longer Gumayusi. Well, we'll get to that. It's actually both of them in this series. But I really thought the draft was going swimmingly for T1. Like they had some really big setups. And then before Faker kind of like ran it down, and it took a lot longer than it should to win this game. But the rest of the team looked great. And I think the draft priority was really on point.
And Guma was super clutch on the Neela. Like his performance on this with Keria's, heals to back him up, plus Neela's W, which gives you so much extra room
and the
to
Lilia
fight.
ult setup so he could close as well was really huge. Like they played the team fights very well.
Faker felt relatively absent in this series, but in this first game, like Guma kind of saved it. There was a team fight towards the end of the game as well where we had the comms given to us, and Guma just goes in, and the rest of the team is screaming like back out, back out, back out, and Guma goes in and like ults 4 people, and they're like, whoa, what? Okay, I guess we win, because they just didn't think he could actually pull it off, but he did. And I thought that his performance on that pick was super good and super reliable. Zeus obviously crushing perfect in the lane in a good matchup there. In this first game, right, where he had extreme control. Some of the other times he, was playing the Olaf, didn't have the same level of control there on the top side. But the pentakill came through, right, which is quite shocking on an Olaf. But when you consider the draft of their opponents, that doesn't really have a ton of engage. Doesn't really have anything.
He's playing the janitor role is the thing, and it's like when you think about it, like. Basically, the way this is supposed to work is Lilia bowling ball goes in, Lilia ult goes off, sets up for Neela ult combined with Senna ult, and then Olaf runs in with R. So any counter engage that they have with, KT has with Glacial Prison or with Seraphine ult, the Olaf just runs through and murders everybody in the backline, right? So that's the way it's supposed to work. They executed it very well at times, and yes, Olaf can get a penta in these circumstances, and did.
And there just isn't that. Like the front line is so robust with an Olaf that's getting healed by Senna and has his ultimate, and there's not a whole lot of CC to like bait him to ult first early, so then you could kind of avoid his ult and then play around it, because you really just have the Sejuani and then you have Senna. And there were some really cool ults from Beryl in that game, to be fair. Like there were a few lineups from T1 that was the mistake. The overextension top side, you mentioned that they punished really well. Like the comp could have worked. I thought it was a good comp from KT, but T1's comp was obviously much more practiced, much more prepared, and worked really well around that Olaf. And when the Olaf was taken away, obviously I think the KT stood a better chance with some of these comps, because they were kind of running their drafts back quite a bit in this series. You move on, move on to like games 2 and 3, and things looked a lot more competitive, right? Like BDD having a perfect KDA on the Smolder in game 2, stacking incredibly quickly. Guess what? It's back the Ziggs, no lane swap opportunities. I thought the Lee Sin, the Yasuo was just way too overcooked. Like this comp didn't have really strong setup, and ultimately was obviously going to be outscaled, so they needed to crush the early game. And then Pyosik played really well in that first skirmish towards the bottom side of the map in that tri-brush. Like he played that super well, and then there were trade kills back, so T1 never got the lead they were hoping for. They had a few decent skirmishes with the Lee Sin, and Keria and Zeus looked disconnected a little bit in some of the team fights later on. But really, to me, this game was just about, the fact that KT have an incredible scaling comp, and T1's comp was a happy gaming comp that could have worked, I think, against a weaker team or a weaker draft, but there was just no reason to do this in this best of 5, in my opinion.
Well, one of my favorite calls that KT did in this game was that they let the Soul Point Drake go in order to take 3 turrets in the mid lane, and they just avoid. They're like, who gives a shit about this? Like, if we take these 3 turrets, we'll get map pressure, and then we'll just take, when they're actually needing Soul, we'll just go ahead and take that instead. And they, it's a risk, right? But they executed on it. and ended up working out in their favor. Like they played around the vision they were able to get from the big push very well. Got obviously a ton of gold for the team off of that also. So for me, KT, like this was their best game. And I think they identified T1's comp had some very limited win conditions. And even though, T1 arguably got some pretty good advantages in the early game, they just weren't able to convert that into any kind of meaningful pressure. And, it would have been super cool to see like Keria on the farming Lee Sin with the Senna come around the flank and like kick a Smolder and hit a 4-man knockup and Yasuo ult that. That's really hard to pull off. And it's also very transparent what you're doing in those situations.
Yeah, I mean the comp is, I don't want to call it binary, but it just doesn't. It kind of has to all in every time. Yes. So if you just avoid that setup, you're like, okay, well, I have damage now. Long term, I have range damage. You don't. Remember, it's nerfed Senna in terms of the actual ability to do damage later on in the game. So it's not like they really had an AD carry in the game at all. So it was just problematic overall in that one. And then we look back at some of the drafts, like for the rest of the series, like game 3. Once again, KT just are falling into this trap of like, Rel is countered by Alistar, and we totally have set up for Misfortune. It'll be fine. Well, they had no setup for Misfortune at all, like at none. So the pick doesn't make sense. They're playing Smolder and just sitting back and letting the game go because like we outscale this, but. Do you actually, though? Because Faker's playing Azir, right? And Guma's going to outpoke you. You have 2 low-range AD carries, if you want to call Smolder an AD carry, because he technically is. He's just an execute bot later on in the game. And they're just outranged. They have engage. They have re-engage. If you do find an Alistar setup, like if Barrow is able to find some angle there. I just felt like KT really didn't give themselves a whole lot of ins, a whole lot of options.
Well, what I found baffling is that after game 1, they were like, yes, please. I really would love. I mean, Zeus blind picked Olaf, and then they just went ahead and like picked MF Smolder into it. Like they knew what they were in for. Like they experienced the Olaf in game number 1. It was not okay. Like you can't do that. And T1's just like slams the Olaf and dares them. Like, well, we will play MF and Smolder into this, and then Olaf will just run into the back line and kill us. Like it didn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I was pretty disappointed with that. It felt like there was no way for KT to win the game, unless they just were like, well, they'll make mistakes and BDD will carry, and BDD, to be fair, he does carry a lot right now, and he has had some phenomenal games. He's the best player on their team, might be the best Smolder in the LCK.
I mean,
unknown,
he's great.
But. We just haven't seen other players play it recently. We've seen Viper have incredible games on it, obviously, and I think Chovy will.
I mean, BDD's positioning is also often very good. Like, he doesn't get touched in a lot of these fights, and he's able to really maximize his damage output. He's very good.
Yeah. But I think just saying BDD Smolder equals win is ultimately not how League of Legends is played. So, that aspect of the draft, that element of the draft that I think Faker would not have been able to play Smolder. I think you knew safely that if you leave this up, you can get it every time. Faker's not going to play it. You're going to have that matchup into the Azir. You're going to feel pretty good about it. BDD was landing very well into Faker and was out farming him, obviously, quite significantly. So, there were definitely some angles. I could see the thought process about why you picked the Smolder, but then there were no elements of how you make sure the Smolder has the opportunity to carry the fights. You don't have reliable frontline because you picked Renekton every time, into Olaf. You didn't have setup for your Misfortune. And then the last game, obviously Zeus just said "fuck you" and picked Vayne,
which we haven't seen since MSI, right? That was his late spring MSI thing, not anytime recently that I can recall.
No, I mean he maybe played it like once or twice this season, but I don't remember any relevant games. It definitely fell out after MSI. But he was just like, "No, I win the game and it's over," and that basically happened. The lack of engage on both teams meant that it ended up being kind of
first game in summer. It was his first game in summer.
Okay. The lack of engage on both teams meant that there were some moments where like KT were kind of setting up being like, you remove T1 and then hoping that T1 would make a mistake, and they did make some mistakes, right? There were some issues. But ultimately still the Vayne was too big, and once again, like Deft basically had to carry. Like there was no opportunity for Lilia to get in range to engage because the Smolder's just gonna pop her instantly. She has to deal with the Caitlyn. The Caitlyn ults. I mean, Guma had a fantastic game. It was constantly ulting, carry was constantly poking. And then you have this Ezreal that has to, setting up for objectives, hit like 7 Mystic shots in a row every time to then whittle their health bars down to then BDD can come in and help clean up and they can win those team fights. And if Def doesn't hit every single shot, then like this comp just doesn't work when you're behind. And once they lost map control, it was just Dunzo. And if he gets caught by a Caitlyn trap that he doesn't see because he's trying to get shift forward to get something done, or if he gets caught by Lux's binding, he's dead. It's over. It's done. Like the game is over. So he has to juggle all of that and then yet still get that poke in. Otherwise, this comp is unplayable. Obviously, Barrel can offer like some poke on the Karma, but realistically, no. Especially since the nerfs we had a really long time ago.
I think this was winnable for KT, especially because, you know, T1 started out with this massive lead. Perfect was entirely held down. Perfect in. You know, one thing I'll credit Perfect for is he does a very good job of playing from behind. Like, you know, he was weak-sided very early on in KT's run this year, and he often, like, he finds value in behind it. You know, he builds Stridebreaker, builds SteRx here, and the backline is still very vulnerable for T1. I mean, this felt like T1's greatest hits plus Faker, who doesn't know how to play Smolder because his Smolder mechanics were like really lacking, and he didn't have any solo queue games on it that we are aware of. I mean, I'm sure he played it a bit in scrims, obviously, because it's like going around, right? It's the Smolder disease being transmitted from team to team right now. But, you know, it's like, oh, Guma's on Caitlyn. It's the Caitlyn Lux lane. Here we go. They're the best Caitlyn Lux team in the world. How do they play this? Oh, they play it as a pick composition. That's right. And, you know, they did force the Ezreal Karma, which is the only lane that can really like counteract some of the push that Caitlyn Lux offers. And in the late game, I think KT had a shot. Like, with between the Corki and the Ezreal and the Karma poke, like, you actually do have a chance here. And especially because their only form of engage is Owner's ult, and he kind of has to use that for peel. And I think if Perfect had actually TP'd to the mid lane and created a flank at the Baron that T1 was trying to do when Glacial Prison was down, like, I think there's a shot that they could have gotten that. Pyosik, by the way, Wolf, I don't know if you know this, because I figured this out when I was streaming my VOD review of the game. Pyosik actually stole the Baron because Baron leveled up and Owner smited it and it went above 1200, and then Pyosik's Liandry's burn from his bowling ball killed it. He didn't even have to flash in it. Flashing in did nothing. He didn't even smite it. Just like fucking hilarious. So actually, Pyosik, if he hadn't flashed in, like maybe KT wins that game. Crazily.
Yeah, I actually didn't know that it was a level up. But I was pretty sure that Leandries did actually secure it, but I didn't know it was because of the level up, which is really funny.
If you frame, but you wouldn't know from like, well, I had to frame by frame it. But if you frame by frame it, you'll see it goes under 1200. So Owner hits smite, and then it right before he hits smite, it goes to like 1210. And then he hits smite, and then the Leandry's burn kills it. It was complete bullshit, by the way. I would be so pissed if I was Owner because it was a perfect smite. It was a perfect smite by Owner. He just got trolled by the game.
So, yeah, this has been like a discussion for a really long time. Like, should Baron be able to level up in combat and stuff like that? Like, probably not. They should take that out of the game. Because this has happened a few times over the years. Either way, like KT, if they just leave after the steal, they're probably in a pretty good spot, but they half-ass committed to team fighting and then got stuck and then died. So it was like without Pyosik, obviously, as you mentioned, because he flashed in. So it was a bit of an oddball call, especially because they don't really have any lockdown or any way to like crush that fight. Like, it's still just an Ezreal Karma Corki comp that doesn't have a jungler after they secure the Baron. So it's not like they had like a sick equalizer they were going to drop down on everybody after that and be like, oh yeah, we got the Baron and now you all die too. Like, nice try, T1. They were like, aha, oh, we can't actually fight this. We gotta get the fuck out of here. Oh no, we can't get out of here. We've got no turret in the top lane. Oh, we're all dead. All GG. I think it was an aggressive move, and it was kind of a choke by KT in that moment. Again, no fault to Pyosik for trying to flash steal the smite. Like, that was just a weird situation. But the draft in itself just didn't have it felt like they were like, oh, I don't know how to deal with what T1 put together here. They're just doing the T1 thing, and that's scary, and we're just gonna play our thing. And I mean, the Karma Ezreal is fine. It's not a bad pick, but it pigeonholed you into being like Deft really has to hard carry this game, and there's just so many ways that goes wrong for him. And he hasn't been. I feel like he's not at a high point right now, and wasn't leading into playoffs. I think earlier this season he certainly was, especially when Ezreal was stronger and was recently buffed. It got slightly nerfed. It's still very relevant. Don't get me wrong, but I feel like at that point when it was hyper buffed and he was playing it a ton and practicing it a ton, he was way more on form than he is now. So they put him in a really awkward spot, and KT had some really big opportunities in that game, but they kind of watched them slip away. I'll say it though, Monty. I feel like when I watch Faker, his performance right now, and some of the ways they're playing, I just don't know if this team, even though they beat KT with some pretty good plays overall and some cool drafting, I don't know if they're going to the finals. Like I just don't know if they actually against real teams.
Well, I think that leads into the next point. Like, do you agree that Gen.G should pick Dplus Kia, or should they have picked T1? Because like T1 like showed some weakness here, right? They almost threw game number 1. I don't like their comp in the 4th game of this series. It just felt like KT walking into a million rakes, like Sideshow Bob in the field full of rakes, like because they just keep first picking Renekton and getting counterpicked. The Gen.G, they're not a team that's going to do that. That's not how they play with Keen at all, right? Keen very famously gets a lot of counter picks, and Zeus is the blind pick player. So I don't know, man. Like, I understand that the concern is that T1 has a higher ceiling, which they absolutely do, than this iteration of Dplus. But you're also picking a Dplus team that seems kind of uniquely strong in this meta because of the way that aiming is playing and because of the things that aiming is good at. Whereas with T1, they're still all over the place, and like Faker, I would not be scared of Faker Smolder from having watched him play it in that final game.
I was pretty surprised. I think time will tell is the answer, but my prediction is I don't think I'm not saying they're going to lose to Dplus, but it makes me uneasy for them that they picked Dplus, because I think Dplus has some really good reads. There's a lot of, I don't want to say it's transparent the way that Gen.G plays, but I feel like Gen.G plays very standard. You know what I mean? Like they play very meta picks. So maybe Gen.G will surprise us and play something different in that first matchup. But do they really ever do that? I mean, the craziest thing they do is play, Draven for Chovy into the Corki, which isn't even that crazy, but it's like, Chovy's so good at it, he can do it. He pulls the Zeri out early in mid because he's like, I'm so good, I can do this, and other people follow suit. If they play Smolder for Chovy, will that really be a surprise to anyone? No, I don't think so. Maybe they have something crazy planned. But I do feel like maybe Dplus just has some really good reads and some really cool draft ideas they didn't show against BNK, because BNK just kept running the same draft concepts back over and over again, and Dplus didn't really have to show too much there, although the reads were pretty good. That it could be, a concern to face off against them. These two teams have historically always gone close in best of fives, whereas that hasn't necessarily been the case for Gen.G fighting T1 on the winner's side of the bracket. It's often been one-sided one way or the other. There have been some game fives, but it feels like overall, Gen.G or T1 hasn't gotten the better end of things. But I do think about, like, if Chovy plays, up against ShowMaker and plays his best game, like maybe it just doesn't matter. It goes kind of back to like our discussion we had about like aiming versus pays. Like, I would love to say that this will actually be the great big test to find out which AD carry is more valuable, but ultimately, the rest of the team that pays is on is stronger, so it won't be a fair fight. And I don't know if Gen.G care either way, and maybe they're scared of the best T1 showing up. But I feel like if you pick T1 and you just ban Faker's champion pool and just play a standard game, you show nothing and you easily beat them. And now maybe plus pull you down to the mud a little bit. You have to show something you didn't want to show.
I mean, the thing is, maybe you're just confident because you take Rel away from Moham, and this team may not be able to actually complete a game of League of Legends, right? So we'll see. By the way, guys, I want to say I was wrong earlier. I forgot that they actually did remove leveling up Baron while in combat. So actually, what caused that, Wolf, was literally just health regen. It literally just health regened at exactly the wrong tick. Which is pretty. I
was gonna say, didn't we have like a whole like fucking
yes, there was
big drama about this? Right? I was like, did they not get rid of it? Maybe they didn't, or maybe it came back. Okay.
No. But it is funny to see that it regains like 20 health at this crucial point in time. So unlucky though. I feel like Wolf, not only should they have taken, so what happens with Baron is that because of the previous controversies, like a couple years ago on 12-9, they took out its ability to level up in combat, and you have to wait 30 seconds before it like gains the health again. But I feel like if it does that, they probably should also just remove any health regen at all to avoid these circumstances, because it was pretty bullshit. It was like pretty bullshit to look at because it was very precise smite timing by owner, and he just got trolled by the game.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things you have to know when you're going for a smite fight. Like, do they have unsealed spellbook that I have to consider? Which abilities do they have that can actually burst, like a Varus Q flying through, like Lux Ultimate, Leandri's burn? You have to consider so
Jinx
many
ult.
things. Jinx ult, Jace Shock Blast. Like, you have to consider all these things on top of trying to, as the Baron, and anyone who's played like literally 10 games of League of Legends knows how crazy it is when you're on a Baron trying to smite it. Even if you're trying to do it with your team and the enemy team isn't there, but you're like, let me see how close to 1200 I can get this. That's hard as fuck as it is in general. Not for these pros, obviously, have done it a million times. When you have to add all these things together, and then the Baron will just randomly get health back to you because you're not tracking exactly when the Baron's going to get health back or any of these other factors like it leveling up, which was removed, thank God. But yeah, it just doesn't make sense that should be a thing that you have to think about. But I guess it is. But ultimately, KT threw after that fight, so it didn't matter.
Well, but the crazy thing is, like, if we had seen Renekton TP into the mid lane and Pyosik hadn't flashed, but it's still stolen the Baron because he didn't have to flash, maybe KT wins that game. That's what's crazy to me. And there should be no way that is a steal. There should be no way that is a steal.
If KT also just back away, then regroup and start pushing the lanes, then maybe they get another team fight. Maybe they actually get an opportunity to win the game off another play as well. Because they'll get map control of that, which is a huge problem in that game. But anyway, we digress. Hanwha now faces off against T1 in the other side of the bracket. So this gets a little bit more interesting because I really did feel like if it's Peanut against Lucid, like, yes, Lucid is really good, but I think Peanut will still just kind of be like, I am the veteran, I can outplay you, and that happened a lot in their matchups when they faced off. Didn't happen every game, but it happened a lot. And, when you consider how Zeka has been playing versus ShowMaker has been somewhat muted recently, I was like, okay, well, that feels very favorable for Hanwha. But then when you add in it's Zeus versus Doran, yes, Doran has sometimes been Zeus's father in big best of fives. But I feel like Zeus probably gets the better end of this. Then you have like Peanut versus Owner, which is a much closer jungle matchup. It feels like they kind of did Hanwha dirty. Like this pick actually kind of did Hanwha a little bit dirty.
Is it, so here's the take. Like, it's been a while since we've seen T1 versus Hanwha live. It's actually been the maximum amount of time because this was the first round robin match of the second round robin. So it was in week 5. So it's been like, 6 weeks since we've actually seen this matchup. Now, at that time, T1 did get smashed by Hanwha. Like, it was not a close series. I mean, it was like 3 kills to 15 in the second game. Hanwha just destroyed them. Peanut and Viper like absolutely took over those games. It was very, very convincing. So the question becomes like, how legit is Hanwha at this point in time? Because Peanut has continued to look great, and Zeka's look good. But Viper kind of fell off the longer we got into the second round robin. But is Hanwha's performance a result of them having nothing to play for over the last couple of weeks, or is that actually reflective of their current standard? I think it is hard to motivate yourself as a player when you really have nothing to play for. So I think Hanwha probably takes this one. And people will say, oh, well, what about Peanut and Doran? Aren't they chokers? They only choke internationally, man. Like, they won plenty of titles here domestically and looked very strong while doing it. So I don't really have that concern.
I do think Hanwha will win, and I'll probably predict them 3-1 or even 3-0, but I feel like this matchup is more interesting than it would have been if it was Dplus against Hanwha. And, if Doran does underperform against Zeus, who's had a little bit of a resurgence, right? He pulled out the Olaf, had a fantastic performance. He just plays Vayne randomly and crushes and just takes over the game. And again, it's not randomly in that, Zeus is a really good Vayne player and played it a ton, but it's been a really long time, and he's like, no, I can still do this. I still understand these matchups incredibly well. This is a thing I can do that you have to think about when you draft against me. Those elements, I think, give T1 a pretty big opportunity here. I wouldn't predict them to win, but I feel like an upset wouldn't shock me. But again, it's going to be down to form. Obviously, Guma Keria have the Senna on lock. We saw that the first two teams, BNK and Dplus, weren't interested in Senna, hadn't maybe prepared it as much as of yet. So we know that Keria can play it. We know that Guma will still pick it up. Like, we know they have that flexibility. Maybe don't play like a Yasuo bottom lane or a Lee Sin bottom lane. I'm begging you. But otherwise, any other type of really strong Senna lane with a strong top laner that can also get value out of those heals would be really nice. I mean, if Faker plays a tank or something like that in the mid lane, they could also utilize it there. So that's something cool. That may also be true of Delight. He's not as known for playing Enchanter supports as he is for playing Engage supports. I think I've got my eyes on his Rel, a little bit of my eyes on his Leona, potentially, in this series, and maybe his Alistar. I mean, he's a really good Alistar player, but I think Alistar's fallen down a little bit. We'll see. Delight's one of the biggest reasons why I think Hana will take this series, though, because I feel like the champs that he's really good at right now, Keria is slightly underperforming on, and the engage opportunities that T1 didn't face because KT relatively just played Enchanter supports or just straight up avoided playing, hard engage in that series, gave T1 so many opportunities to take over objectives the way that they wanted. You consider Delight on Rakan, Alistar, Leona, Rel. Like, that's where I'm like, ooh, well, I think that's a huge edge that they have that you don't have. Nobody ever talks about the sports, but I feel like Delight is going to take names in this upcoming series, and I think it's going to be more about him than it is about Viper, and I think it's going to be more about him than it is about Zeko or Doran, and I think Peanut will be a big part of the games that we see for sure, but I have my eyes on Delight right now, especially when we consider how well he's playing, even in those slumpy games from Viper. Like, Delight still looked really good. So I do think T1 drops down to lower bracket after this series. And
there's
I do
also,
think
there's also the factor, too, that whenever it matters, Doran actually just puts Zaya straight in the dumpster. Yeah. Right? Like, that Doran may suck a lot of the time in the regular season, but in playoffs, he, for whatever reason, he always just turns it the fuck on versus Zayas.
Yeah, he does. That's what I was saying earlier. Like, he has been known from time to time to be Zayas' father. As Reddit will tell you if you read it after the game. And that theme, has been very true. I mean, the memorable finals for me was that spring finals where he was on Gen.G and just played Gragas and absolutely destroyed him and nullified all his pressure, and that's the most memorable one for me. But there have been many, many series where Doran does show up. However, there have been almost as equally many where he chokes in a big best of 5 and underperforms, loses game 1, then gets tilted and plays like Akshan or just completely flashes for no reason, or you know what I mean? Like, Doran has had games where he messes up and he's like, oh yeah, well, I'm going to double down and do something even crazier. And sometimes he bounces back like that, but
we call that whippoing.
Yeah, more often than not, he kind of runs it down harder the next time. He's more of a question mark for me. Like, I feel like Zeka really strong in this meta. Will take opportunities that Closer did not take to play pick-based comps in the series against Dplus. I feel like Zeka will, Tekken into Ahri if he thinks it's appropriate. He may play the Sylas if he thinks it's appropriate. If somebody's putting Gnar Prio in there, like Zayas, who's a really good Gnar player, he may take that opportunity. And I think there's a lot more depth there than what KT showed us. Because KT are like, BDD, he has to carry. He's not going to be playing any fun pick stuff, right? But Closer and Zeka are similar players. That's why we call Closer often budget Zeka. And Zeka is real Zeka, and he will actually take those opportunities. And with how Faker is looking right now, I feel like Zeka just kind of has the opportunity to crush him straight up. Especially with the early game Yone buffs that we saw.
Yes,
there's
begun the Yone Wars have.
So,
ha!
Very clever.
Yeah, you can take that one, Wolf. That's all yours for the broadcast.
I mean, Faker's Yone, on the other hand, probably should never be played again until because he has looked.
Dude,
like,
it makes me.
It makes was a better Yone than him, man. I don't know.
I don't.
It's sad.
I don't like this timeline where now we have to add all of the champions that Faker can't play to a list instead of just being like all the champions he can dumpster people on, which is how we used to do it. Where it's like, of course he can play mid Master Yi. Of course he can play mid Riven. No, No, he can't play even meta champions now. It's very sad.
It's a conversation that I feel like a lot of people are uncomfortable having because he is the greatest of all time, and him not being able to play Yone doesn't take that away from him. But
I don't know, man. I feel like his injury's bothering him again. Like watching him, some of those Azir plays, like he's a good Azir player, but why is he missing shuffles, man? Like that shit. The fuck's he doing? He missed a
yeah,
shuffle on a Seraphine. Can't do that.
It's not looking great, and I'm okay talking about it because I think it's just factually he's having one of the worst splits of his career, and his team is still getting it done without him, which is almost inspiring to see if you're a T1 fan. But we do have to consider that now he's facing off against the big boys, the punishing ones that will absolutely rip you a new one if you have a bad day. Like BDD, I feel like didn't play because he was playing just like scaling picks and Corki in that series. Like he
Well,
can be,
he also has to play with 4 clowns, so it's difficult.
but then you have Chovy, ShowMaker, who on his best day will punish you. I mean, if he pulls out
And
LeBlanc,
Zeka's had a very solid. I mean, this is a great meta for Zeka, and he's had a very solid split. Very solid.
his ear is much better than it used to be when we really criticized him for it a lot 2 years
They
ago.
changed Corki, so he's not bad at it anymore because he doesn't have to use package. That's a huge plus.
Yeah, so I mean, that's where I worry. Is Arguma Keria, are they fine? Yeah, they've got a great read. Zayas is looking a lot more comfortable right now in playoffs than he did in the last few weeks of regular season, where we're starting to look pretty low on him. And Owner has been solid this whole season. Honestly, frankly, pretty much solid the whole year. Like Owner gets blamed a lot when his team is losing because he has like no lane prio, and then he's trying to save his team, and people are like, because he went in. I'm like, he's trying to save the game, okay? Junglers are always the first ones who look bad when the team is losing. And I feel like Owner has been like year long the most consistent. Like when Guma had his drop off, Keria has drop off, Zayas has drop off, Faker's been pretty absent since MSI. And Owner's the one who can get it done, but I do worry about what happens in the mid lane. Not just in this matchup. If they get the upset win over Hanwha, which I can't predict that, but if they get that upset win, like it doesn't get easier. If you want that run to happen to the finals, if you want them to lift a trophy, and they were so close in spring. I mean, they were just one game away, and we were all saying like, oh, it might just be done. Like maybe T1 has the momentum. Maybe they're going to take the series. And Gen.G brought it back, but that was not that long ago. It was just a few months ago. But there's just not that much time between now and round 2 and then round 3. And we saw, last time Faker had his injury, he took some time off, right, and was able to recover very quickly, and obviously still was quite hampered in his champion pool, but was still able to get it done, right? And this feels very different because he's not taking time off, and maybe he doesn't even have an injury. Maybe he's just frustrated. Maybe he's frustrated with the game. Maybe he's frustrated with the meta. He doesn't want to play 80 picks. He wants to play high impact picks. But I do think it has to be said that if he doesn't recover soon in terms of his gameplay, I'm not even talking about physical injury, then I just can't expect T1 to go deep. And that's something I could say even though they just 3-1 KT, because it felt like he was largely absent from that series.
Yeah. And it was very close to not being a 3-1 because of a play that he decided to make in a game that was effectively won had they just played out the map state properly in game 1. So wasn't great, but maybe Faker can recover. Obviously, we think good things about this meta, right? And here's the thing, Faker does tend to pull it out when it matters. Like he tends to come in clutch. So no guarantees. I do think it's going to be very difficult for them to beat Hanwha Life. Very difficult. It just feels like Hanwha and Gen.G are like the clear cut top 2 teams in the LCK right now.
I hope that when we do this show next week and you and I are talking about the results, we are talking about a sick, awesome upset, and it's not just our number 1 seed and number 2 seed absolutely booty blasting the other team.
I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. Besides, we've got a ton of LCK games, so there are only 2 this last week. But we got 4 starting on Wednesday this week, Wednesday Korea time. So it's like early Wednesday morning for many people in the West, to like very middle of the night if you're in America, or very early morning if you're in Europe. And so these matches, like we get to see Gen.G versus Dplus and Hanwha versus T1 Wednesday, Thursday, but then we take a day off and it's going to be Saturday, Sunday, right? So day off for teams to prep. Then we're going to be right into losers and winners finals, or losers bracket, then winners finals. And then we do losers finals the day before the finals the following week. So we've only got 2 more weeks of regular season, then the regional gauntlet, and then we're done.
Yeah, no, it's gonna be pretty good games, and I think that the losers bracket will be really interesting. This second round might not be. I'm hoping it is, and I'm hoping that the facts and the information and the data that we have will mislead us, and then we'll see some sick drafting from Dplus, and then Faker is back, and holy shit, did you see what Zayas played yesterday? I hope we get some of that, but I do feel like it'll just be better teamwork and raw mechanics for Gen.G and Hanwha Life that win out. That's my expectation. It's boring, but it is based on what we know, Monty, probably what's going to happen.
There we go. All right. Well, we'll see you next week. We'll have 4 matches to talk about as we head into the losers bracket and grand finals weekend. We'll see you then.